Hi everyone, welcome back to Fleecimals Friday. I'm Michelle from Fleecimals, here to teach you some life skills about sewing and crafting. For today's project, I'm going to be teaching you how to sew on different types of buttons. First, we're going to be going over different types, as well as different techniques to sew them on. All right, let's get started. So there are lots of different kinds of buttons, including your typical 4 and 2 hole buttons, and even some fun ones like little Ritz crackers, candy canes, stuff like that. And those, as well as a lot of decorative buttons, are going to be shank buttons, so it only has one hole. So I'm going to be showing you a variety of ways to sew buttons on today, as well as how to replace and fix a button on a cuff, as I've been told that is the #1 place that a button gets lost. All right, so to start off, we're just going to start with threading our needle. I'm using a black thread, so that way it's very visible with the contrast. And I'm going to show you the fastest way and a very secure way to tie a knot. So this is called the quilter's knot. I usually always use a double strand of thread. I find it to be the most secure, the easiest to work with. It's very, very good for beginners, but it also, you're getting 2 thread for every stitch, so it can be a little more secure as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle. This is if you're right-handed. You're going to place the end of your thread on top of your needle and hold that with your thumb. And then you're going to go under and around your needle 3 times. You're then going to gather up all that thread with your thumb, and then you're going to just slide your needle through, and like a magic trick, it's going to give you that knot. We're going to trim the excess away and start with our needle. I'm going to use a thimble. I find that thimbles give a little bit more strength. It doesn't hurt your finger as much. And when you're pushing through, this thimble has little, I mean, they all have holes, but this one has deeper holes, so when I do push a needle through, it's not going to move very far. All right, so we're going to start with the most basic button, a 2-hole button. We're going to come up through the back of the fabric with our needle and put the needle through one of those holes. And it's very simple. You're just going to go back down through the second hole and repeat. To make it a little easier for finding where to come up, you can flip your fabric over and go near to that knot that you first did, and that'll bring you up just about where your first hole is. When you're doing buttons, I usually do at least 4 full strokes, full stitches, just to make sure it's secure. You could do 5 if you wanted, you could do 3, but I would say the more stitches you have for a button, it's going to be more secure. Don't go overboard though. If you do 8 stitches, it's just going to make it bulky and it's not going to look good. So I usually do about 4 stitches. All right, now for this type of button, you can also do a piece underneath to help the button raise up a little bit. This is helpful if it is going to be put through a buttonhole. It'll lift the button a little bit. It also is good to learn this technique if you have to match other buttons that are on your garment. So it's better to learn that now than need it later. So you're going to come up where your first hole is, but you're not going to go into the hole. You're going to just go under the button. And then you're going to take your thread and wrap it around your button a couple of times. And then we go back down where the second hole is. So this will wrap the threads that you've been stitching up and down. It probably also gives it a lot of stability as well. And then we're just going to tie our knot. What I find easiest to tie a knot is, rather than looping back through the fabric, is to loop through the threads that are already there. Once you have a loop, once you have a loop, you're going to put your needle through that loop and pull until it's closed. Now, the one thing you can tell if a knot is done, at least my way, is if you tug on that needle, you will audibly hear the thread make a little sound. If you hear that sound, your knot is tied. If you do have 2 layers of fabric, you can hide the tail of your knot, which I'll show you how to do. Most times when you do repair a button, you might not have this option. But if you do, you take your needle and you put it in between the 2 fabrics. So you're not going to come up through the front. You're just going behind, like in between. And then you're going to come back up through the back, just like that. You're going to pull that thread a little tight so you gather the fabric, and you're going to snip. And that will hide the tail in between the 2 fabrics. So that is how you put on a 2-hole button. All right. And it looks like I actually pulled all the way through that last piece. So be careful with that. So next we're going to do a 4-hole button. There are different techniques for different buttons. So you might have one button that the thread that was sewn on is in an X shape, and sometimes you'll have a parallel line shape. I'm going to show you both. They're very simple. The parallel line is very similar to the 2-hole button, and the X is just back and forth. So I'm going to get some new thread because mine isn't long enough. Dropping your thread helps you get more thread faster, right? All right. We're going to thread our needle and do that knot again, the quick knot, the quilter's knot. It does take a couple of tries to get used to that knot, but I can tell you for a fact, once you get it right, you're never going to want to go back. It is very fast, very efficient, and wonderful to use. Okay, so the first 4-hole button I'm going to show is the parallel lines. So just like before, you're going to come up through the back of your fabric. You're going to go through one of the holes, and you're going to go down through your second hole. To make sure your button isn't super loose, a good technique is holding your thread taut, which means very tight, then holding your button down, and then you can go through that second hole. If you get this can happen if you create a slip knot. Stop what you're doing and use your needle to straighten out your thread before pulling. So now that we've got this first line, we're going to go to the back and we're going to make a diagonal line to the bottom left hole. So essentially I came up bottom right hole. I came up the top right hole and I went down the top left. So now I'm going to come up the bottom right and I'm going to go down the bottom left. And then you just repeat this until you have 3 or 4 stitches across each of the sets, and finish off with a knot. I'm just going to stop at 2 passes just so we can get on to our next button. All right, for our next 4-hole button, we're gonna do a cross. Now this is used in a lot of places, but it can build a lot of bulk. So in the center, since you're crossing all of those stitches, you're gonna get a little bump in the center. So a lot of buttons do have an indent on the top to counteract that. So we're gonna go up through the fabric just like before. And we're gonna go into that top right hole just like the last one. Now instead of going to the top left, we're gonna go to the bottom left. So again, hold your thread taut, find your button placement, and then insert down and into. And now you're gonna wanna thread, since we went from top right to bottom left. You can either go, you can do top left to bottom right, but I find going right to left, because I'm right-handed, makes it a lot easier. So I'm just gonna come up through the bottom right and go down through the top left. And then you're just going to keep repeating that until you have enough thread where it feels secure. Now with any of these buttons, you can do the wraparound. You don't have to. I would match based on the button the buttons that are still on whatever garment you are fixing. If there are other buttons, base your stitching off of those so it matches the best. We're just gonna tie that off. You can also do a double knot if it's gonna be a garment that button is used a lot on. When we get to the end later in the video, we're going to be fixing the cuff, the button on the cuff of a button-down shirt. That you may want to knot twice just to make sure it's secure. Now, the next button is a shank button. It just has a shank off the back with 1 hole. It is fairly simple, but since there's only 1 hole and it's on the back, you do have to do a lot of movement to make sure that it's straight. So we're going to come up through the back of our fabric like before. You're going to go just through that buttonhole. Now see how it moves a lot? My recommendation is for the first one, gauge how wide that shank is and match your stitch to that. So I'm putting my needle back down through, and as you can see, that's not that much larger than the shank that the button itself has. So I'm just going to go through, and you're just going to go up, through, and back again, over and over again until it's secure. Now, to find your placement, you may want to pull your button out a tiny bit so that way you can see exactly where you want to go. And that way you can get back into the button. But make sure by the second or third one you've pulled that taut, because if you haven't by then, it could cause problems and you might not be able to get it tight again. So you're just going to go up under the button, through the hole, and back down. Do this as many times as it feels secure. With these buttons, I usually go until the whole shank from side to side, the bottom side is filled with stitches. So I just did 2 stitches here. I would probably do 3 more, and that would fill up the rest of that gap. If you want practice on buttons, I would recommend picking up a piece of cotton. Maybe you have a scrap piece around your house, an old button down that you're not wearing anymore. I wouldn't recommend a t-shirt because that's a jersey knit. It's a cotton knit, so it's going to be stretchy, and most stretchy things don't have buttons on it, and so it's just going to be a more difficult experience. So if you have just a straight piece of cotton, an old pillowcase that has been ripped that you can practice on, I definitely recommend before you try on garments, because it can be a little difficult, especially if you really need that button right the first time. You could end up dropping it, you could lose it, things can happen. So I'm going to grab the shirt that is missing a button, and which sleeve is that on? So this button is starting to pull off. So we're just going to take it off completely and replace it. If this button wasn't here, I would say study this button, see how it was sewn on originally, so that way you can sew it on the same way. But luckily for this shirt, there's a lot of buttons in there. So we're just going to snip. And then you're going to want to get thread that matches the color of your shirt. So in this case, it would be white thread. I'm going to go grab some. All right, with your white thread, you're going to want to thread your needle. Ooh. I've already tied this one, so let me trim this. And thread your needle and tie a knot, just like before. So luckily for me, this button was still on before removing. So I can actually visibly see where the holes for the button are. If you can't, I would gauge with the buttonhole to figure out exactly where you want to place it. You can also use the other sleeve. Luckily for us, there's another sleeve on this shirt. So you can pull over the other sleeve and see, okay, it's a little bit, it's about an inch away. So you can gauge based on that as well. And then if you need to find an additional button, a lot of garments do come with extra buttons for this exact reason. If you're at work and a button pops and you can't find it, usually they come with them. So we're going to follow these buttonholes exactly. And as you can see, this button is made with a cross pattern. So we're going to follow that. I'm going to go up exactly through one of the holes that is already there. Place my button. And just so I'm in the same spot, I'm going to thread through the diagonal button that I have and go through that hole. Just so I'm not creating more holes in the shirt than is necessary. And I can pull that. So now I'm going to go through the next hole that is in the shirt. Luckily the button is not quite tight, so I can pull it up a little bit to find the last hole. And then I will just repeat, honestly, until either it matches this button or until I make it even more secure. If this button has already fallen off, there can be a number of reasons. One, it wasn't sewn on the best, it wasn't tied properly afterwards, or you have a lot of use of this button. If you do have a lot of use, you can spend time rebuttoning it a lot, so you might want to do extra stitches just to be sure it's nice and secure. All right, now the next thing I want to check is if the other button has a wraparound, just to make sure that it matches, but also if this button has one, that means that the original button has one, which will make it easier to put on the cuff. So just checking, see how it has two separate threads, two separate thread holes. If we go back to the first one we did, all around you can really only see one color. It's stitched together. So we don't have to worry about that. We can go to the back and secure with a knot. So I'm going to make sure this is extra secure by doing a full knot. I'm going to make sure this is extra secure by doing a full knot and then doing another one just to be sure. So we're going to do a knot. And now to make sure this is even more sturdy, I'm going to go through the knot that I just made with my needle. You're going to get up close and personal with that knot that you made. And tie another knot. So you can hear that, and we can just snip, and it's done. Now you can repair any button you need.